Hello and welcome back to the William Gomez podcast. I am William Gomez and I am grateful to have you here. In our last episode, we explored desire, the restless movement that shapes so much of human experience. Today, we turn to a concept that sits at the heart of desire, something essential for understanding why desire never fully settles, why it keeps returning, shifting, and transforming throughout life. This concept is lack. Lack may sound like something negative, as though it implies that something is wrong or missing in a way that should be corrected. But in Lacanian psychoanalysis, lack is not a flaw or a mistake in the human structure. It is a condition of being human. Lack is what makes desire possible. Without lack, there would be no longing, no curiosity, no creativity, and no movement in the psyche. Lack opens a space within us that keeps us reaching toward meaning, connection, and possibility. Let us begin by thinking about what lack actually means. Lack is the sense that something is missing, but without knowing exactly what that something is, it is the awareness that we are not complete, that we are not whole in the way the mirror image once suggested. Lack is not an emptiness we can fill with an object or an achievement. It is a structural gap, a kind of opening that cannot be sealed shut. This opening is what allows desire to move. If everything were complete, nothing would be sought. Without lack, life would have no tension, no unfolding, and no transformation. To understand lack more deeply, we need to return for a moment to the mirror stage. When the infant identifies with their reflection, they believe they see a whole and unified self. But this unity is an illusion. Inside, the child feels fragmented, dependent, and unfinished. The identification with the mirror image creates an idea of wholeness, but this wholeness does not match the child's lived experience. The gap between the imagined unity and the lived fragmentation creates the first sense of lack. The child begins to sense that something is missing, something they cannot name, something they hope the other person might provide. This early lack becomes woven into the structure of desire. The child turns to the caregiver not only for needs but also for reassurance, completion, and meaning. Yet the caregiver cannot fully satisfy this longing because the longing is not for a specific object. It is a longing born from the gap within the child, a gap that no external intervention can erase. This is why lack remains throughout life. It is part of our structure, and in the realm of language, lack takes on another dimension. When we enter the symbolic order, we become beings shaped by words. But language, as powerful as it is, cannot capture the fullness of our experience. Words give us identity, roles, and meanings, but they also limit us. They create boundaries around what can be spoken and what must remain unspoken. The parts of ourselves that cannot be expressed become part of our experience of lack. Even when we name our desires, something always escapes. There is always a gap between what we say and what we feel. This gap is not a sign of inadequacy. It is simply the nature of language. Words are never enough to express the whole of our inner world. The space that remains between language and experience is another form of lack. Let us look at how lack appears in relationships. When we seek closeness, recognition, or love from another person, we often hope that the other will complete us, that they will fill the gap within us. But no person can do this. The other may offer companionship, love, or understanding, but they cannot dissolve lack. They cannot complete the inner structure of another person. Sometimes this realization brings disappointment, but it also brings freedom. When we understand that lack is part of who we are, we stop asking others to be perfect or to repair something that cannot be repaired. Lack also teaches us humility in relationships. It reminds us that we approach others not as complete beings, but as beings who share a similar structure. We all carry a sense of incompleteness. We all long for something beyond what can be given. When two people recognize this in each other, their relationship becomes more compassionate. They stop trying to fix one another and they start listening more deeply. Lack also shapes our fantasies. Fantasy is not simply a daydream or an imagined scenario. Fantasy is a structure that gives shape to desire. The object in the fantasy is not the true object of desire. It is a symbol that stands in for the lack at the center of the subject. The fantasy creates a picture of what we believe will satisfy us. But the moment we get what we imagined, desire shifts again. The fantasy dissolves or transforms. This happens because the fantasy was never about the object. It was about the lack that the fantasy was trying to cover. We see this often in life. Someone may long for a relationship, believing that once they find a partner, they will feel complete. But when the relationship begins, desire shifts. The partner cannot fill the structural gap. Another person may pursue a particular job or achievement with the belief that success will bring a lasting sense of fulfillment. But even when the goal is reached, the sense of completion is temporary. Desire returns, sometimes in a new form. This does not mean that relationships or achievements are unimportant. It simply means that they cannot erase lack. Lack also appears in creativity. Creativity emerges from the sense that something is missing, something that wants expression. Artists, writers, musicians, and thinkers often describe feeling compelled to create, but unable to fully explain why. Their work is an attempt to give form to something that has no form. Creativity arises because lack creates a space that invites expression. Without lack, there would be no creative impulse, no search for meaning, and no desire to imagine new worlds. The body also carries lack. The body feels hunger, tension, longing, and desire in ways that exceed language. These bodily sensations often point towards something missing, something unresolved. People sometimes describe feeling a pull in the chest, a knot in the stomach, or a restless energy that they cannot explain. These feelings are not simply physical, they reflect the structure of lack within the subject. The body speaks the language of lack long before the mind can interpret it. Lack also shapes how we relate to ourselves. We may imagine an ideal version of who we should be, someone who is confident, calm, successful, or perfectly balanced. This ideal image is a construction of the imaginary order. It seems to promise wholeness, but because it is an illusion, it creates a sense of failure or inadequacy when we cannot match it. This gap between the image and our lived reality is another form of lack. The more tightly we cling to the ideal image, the more painful this gap becomes. Understanding lack allows us to loosen our attachment to the ideal self. It opens the possibility of accepting ourselves as incomplete and unfinished. When we accept lack, we soften. We allow ourselves to be human. We stop demanding perfection from ourselves. We begin to live with more compassion. Lack also teaches us about boundaries. When we try to fill lack with external objects, we may become trapped in cycles of consumption, dependency, or compulsive behavior. This happens because objects cannot fill the structural gap. They may bring pleasure or temporary satisfaction, but they cannot touch the deeper space of lack. Recognizing this helps us approach pleasure with more awareness and balance. Lack is not despair, lack is possibility. It is the opening through which we grow, evolve, and reach beyond ourselves. Without lack, life would be flat, predictable, and closed. It is lack that invites us to dream, to question, and to create. Lack is the space that allows transformation. Let us now reflect on how lack connects to the real. The real is the part of experience that resists symbolization. Lack is the sign that something cannot be captured completely in language or image. Lack and the real are intimately connected. They both point toward the limits of meaning. They remind us that life is larger than the structures we use to organize it. This recognition can feel unsettling, but it can also feel grounding. It reminds us that we do not need to have everything figured out. As we move toward the end of this episode, let us consider how understanding lack can help us navigate life with more clarity. When we stop trying to eliminate lack, we stop chasing impossible forms of completeness. We stop blaming ourselves for feeling restless or uncertain. We learn to live with the gap, not as a problem, but as part of the beauty of being human. Lack invites us to be curious rather than certain. It invites us to listen to desire without expecting desire to resolve. It invites us to form relationships not in order to complete ourselves, but to share our incompleteness with others. It invites us to live with openness and humility. In the next episode, we will explore object petit a, the object cause of desire. This concept will help us understand how desire attaches itself to particular objects, experiences, or people, and why these attachments never fully satisfy. But for now, I hope this reflection on lack helps you approach yourself with more compassion and helps you recognize that the space within you that feels unfinished is actually the place where life continues to unfold. Thank you for listening. This is the William Gomez podcast. Take care of yourself, stay curious, and I will speak with you again soon.